In the cold lands north of the Empire, there are many dangerous regions in which monsters reign supreme. The bleak region of Troll Country is particularly infamous for its roving bands of trolls and the constant invasions of the Warriors of Chaos. Yet, this region is also home to powerful orc tribes that must fight for survival on a daily basis. In these wastelands, most races would forge a common cause and unite to survive the constant danger. But each of the greenskin tribes are bitter rivals. Amidst holding off demons and monsters of unspeakable horror, the orcs seek to eradicate one another to prove their dominance. It was from one of these tribes that a lesser and unremarkable orc chieftain would rise to become a feared legend. The orc chieftain destined to become infamous was a beast named Azhag. His mob wasn't particularly tough or renowned. Thus, when a large horde of chaos warriors descended upon Troll Country from the wastes, the greenskins retreated underground. The tribe of Azhag delved deep into the labyrinthian pathways beneath the ancient ruin of a place once known as Todtheim. Despite having escaped the tides of spiky umis, the orcs soon found themselves battling against foul creatures and demons that had come to inhabit the cursed city. This roaming battle eventually guided the utterly lost warband into the den of a powerful multi-headed chaos troll. Azhag single-handedly slew the beast, and while searching its cave for loot, discovered an ancient crown. Uncaring of potential dangers, the orc warboss placed the crown on his head, and immediately heard mysterious whispers slipping into his mind. He led what was left of his tribe out of the maddening labyrinth with ease, almost as if he suddenly knew every path. After that day, Azhag was no longer the same. The crown he discovered became a permanent fixture atop his skull, and he developed an infamous habit of always muttering to himself. He began speaking in a notably un-orcish voice most of the time, for unknown to the boys, this terrible artifact contained a fragment of an ancient power from the dry deserts to the far south. Its oppressive will slammed down on Azhag's own, attempting to possess the orc completely. Yet, despite the rather simple mind of the orc chieftain, his will was like iron, and although he was changed into something definitely not Azhag, the crown never succeeded in gaining total control. After leaving the depths of Todtheim, the crown began whispering advice and aiding the orc with sudden flashes of arcane power. This combination of orcish brutality and powerful sorceries under the direction of an ancient guile made for an unstoppable creation. Over the course of a single year, Azhag rose from being an unknown chieftain to commanding the largest Waaagh ever to rise from Troll Country. Whether with brute strength, dark sorcery, or quite un-orcish cunning, the Slaughterer bound every warboss in the region to his unbreakable will. For the first time in history, all of the greenskin tribes in the north were gathering under a single banner. Word began to spread far across the lands about the rising horde, leading even more orcs and goblins to journey forth so they might join under Azhag. Even as his forces grew, the occasional army of southern greenskins or human barbarians would show up to face the warboss. Yet each time the crown whispered complex strategies and suggestions into his mind that always worked to perfection. Each victory grew his horde more and more, despite many orcs finding Azhag's habit of trying to explain orders rather than just bellowing to be off-putting and odd. So long as he kept winning, however, the greenskins were content to tolerate even the extremely un-orky spells that would blast the occasional enemy to dust, or consume them in a flash of light, only to leave behind a withered corpse. As the crown embedded itself deeper and deeper into Azhag's mind, it built within him a rising desire to lead his Waaagh south. For the Iron Relic sought to return to the land of its forging, and intended to use the greenskin horde to smash a path down to the land of the dead. The ancient crown desired to return to its master above all else, and thus built the urge within the orc to begin his invasion. the lands of men would come to forever fear the day when the Slaughterer came. War Azhag descended down upon Kislev in a green tide of utter destruction. Each time the horde was brought to battle, the humans made the mistake of believing they understood their foe, designing their defenses and tactics to counter the classic outnumber and charge all other orcs relied upon. But Azhag was nothing like any orc the men of the north had faced before, as he commanded his armies to perform complex maneuvers that hadn't been used by living armies in thousands of years. Time after time, the war boss smashed aside the armies of Kislev and the Empire with contemptuous ease. Yet the dark genius of his strategies was not the only weapon of Azhag, for when his foes proved clever enough to avoid total defeat, he would engage the enemy himself upon his wyvern's skull muncha. The monstrous creature would smash aside enemy units, even as the war boss rained spells of death down upon them. Nothing could stand against the brutal charge of Skullmuncha and the dark sorceries at the orc's command. But all was not well with the mighty war boss, for the spirit of the orc himself fought the crown's will on every step of the invasion. The orc part of Azhag wanted to raid every city they passed, spending time afterwards to enjoy the spoils like a proper orc. The crown despised such delays, and would rage at the war boss every time his army stopped to raise effigies to Gork and Mork, or when he would lead his Wa off course to engage an enemy army or settlement. Each time one of these contests of wills flared to life, Azhag would become quite sullen and stare off into the distance with seemingly vacant eyes, like some idiotic troll that forgot where it was or what it was eating. The greenskins within his horde knew something was deeply wrong with their boss, but rather than truly worry about it, they chose to ignore his odd behavior so long as the victories kept rolling in. Yet his troops couldn't help but feel suspicious that one day all the wrongness with the boss would cause a big problem, and they were right. In the year 2515, Azhag's horde wandered off the path set by the crown yet again to battle against one of the Empire's few remaining strong forces at the Battle of Osterwald. As men clashed with orcs in the fields, the greenskin battle line wavered as none other than the knightly order of the Knights Panther slammed home. The Slaughterer took note of this charge and directed Skullmuncha directly into the fray to counter this assault. Unfortunately for Azhag, it was at this moment that the will within the crown, infuriated at yet another delay, attempted once more to take complete control over the orc. The ensuing battle of wills left the war boss stupefied atop his wyvern, opening up a rare moment of weakness. It was during this that the Grand Master, Werner von Kriegstadt, struck, cutting down Azhag the Slaughterer. Without the dark genius to guide them, the greenskins were routed, and the Wa was ended. In the aftermath, the Grand Theogonist found the corpse of Azhag, and realized the crown for its true nature. Refusing to allow his bare flesh to touch the Iron Crown, he sped the artifact to the deepest vault beneath the Temple of Sigmar in Altdorf. Here it was contained by the most powerful sorceress traps and holy wards the Empire could devise, in hopes of guarding that ancient evil for the rest of eternity. Now that we've finished the relatively short history of Azhag, let's go ahead and move on to his equipment. When leading his armies into battle, Azhag always rode upon his terrifying wyvern, Skullmuncha. This great beast was a gift brought to the war boss near the start of the invasion by the night goblin tribes that reside deep within Red Eye Mountain to show their great respect for his might. Wyverns are repulsive creatures in many ways, from their absolutely foul temperament to the deadly venom to be found within their fangs, claws, and the tips of their tails. These cannibalistic monsters share much in common with orcs, as they both are the most disgusting smelling creatures to be found in the old world, and take great pleasure in proving their might over others. However, Skullmuncha is unique, for this wyvern is quite a bit larger than most of its kin. The Red Eye tribe gifted it to Azhag already as an adult, which for all other orcs would mean it was impossible to tame, as even the most calm wyverns have to be trained from birth. The Slaughterer was no mere greenskin, however, and with a single glance subdued the beast with his undoubtable will. Despite the infamously vicious temperament of Skullmuncha, the monster seemed almost docile towards its master. There were many victories won by Azhag due to the war boss's nasty habit of using the wyvern as his preferred countercharge tactic. Skullmuncha would descend from the skies to crash into the enemy line, crushing countless soldiers beneath its immense bulk, and granting an agonizing death to any even lightly wounded as poison coursed through their veins. It didn't help that Azhag bolted iron plates on various parts of this beast to make it tougher and look even more terrifying. When stuck in, however, Skullmuncha didn't do all of the work. When it comes to his personal weapons in close combat, Azhag always relied on his two magical weapons known as Slaga's Slashes. As the name implies, they are two pieces of crude metal bashed into the rough shapes of swords that allow the war boss to cut down his foes in a frenzy of slashing. The forging of these weapons and their magical property likely has an orcish origin, due to the plain, crude nature of its design. The enchantment bound within them also allows Slaga's Slashes to strike even the swiftest of opponents, cutting through the air with alarming accuracy that seems to adjust to prevent any hope of dodging. That being said, it tends to only work when Azhag unleashes his initial whirlwind of attacks, adding to the already devastating strength orcs have with their first swings. When it comes to defense, the war boss relies upon Azhag's Ard armor, which is a fairly simple iron set, covered in various talismans and markings. It's quite questionable how many of the trinkets Azhag covers himself in are actually useful, but regardless, the effectiveness of these charms is undeniable, as they give him the ability to shrug off blows from a giant or even cannonballs should the charms flash to life as they are supposed to. Due once more to the basic nature of this equipment, it is likely this suit of armor and Azhag's weapons originated from some point prior to the war boss gaining the Crown of Sorcery. Perhaps there was an orc named Slaga who was able to forge the equipment for Azhag, or maybe Slaga was a shaman that appears to have augmented the Slaughterer's equipment. We don't know, but those are possible theories. However, without a doubt, the most important piece of equipment to ever fall into Azhag's possession was the Crown of Sorcery. This absurdly ancient artifact was forged thousands of years ago in the lands of Nehekara, back when the living still held some domain there. It was forged by a man who would become one of the greatest threats to ever leave his mark on the world, Nagash. The Crown of Sorcery is one of the mightiest creations of the great necromancer, for it contained a fragment of his soul, and bolstered his dark sorceries immensely. The power of this crown is legendary beyond compare, for it allowed Nagash to lay low the greatest nation of men in the south, and nearly succeed in raising all of the world's dead. It was later found by the mage Catan, who would become one of the most powerful wizards to ever live, and led to the founding of the mighty city of Morcaine. After Catan's death and the destruction of the Strigoi kingdom, a necromancer managed to spirit away the crown to the northern lands ruled by barbarian tribes, and attempted to gain immense power with its use. Eventually, he was killed by none other than Sigmar Heldenhammer himself, after a mighty battle before being claimed by the young emperor. Upon wearing it himself, the crown began to corrupt Sigmar, just like it had countless others, until thanks to the efforts of his fellow men, the one-day god of the empire managed to resist the Crown of Sorcery. It was sealed until the revival of Nagash himself, when the great necromancer led his shambling hordes north in order to reclaim his crown. He was defeated by Sigmar, and the Empire once more attempted to seal the crown away. After this, it continued to be passed from various owners, often by murder, until one day it finally came to rest within the bone-strewn lair of a mighty chaos troll, where it would later be found by Azhag. The Crown of Sorcery is a pure iron relic that, as one can see from its history, contains immeasurable power. It lures in those who don it with immense sorcerous might, and whispers of great and terrible secrets. Of all the creatures who ever possessed it, Azhag the Slaughterer was likely the most dangerous. Orcs are already large and fierce creatures that are difficult to kill, but with the dark intellect of Nagash guiding one, the greenskins are completely unstoppable. This doesn't even include that the crown guides its bearer to powerful great magics, which in the case of Azhag allowed him to unleash barrages of death magic capable of obliterating armies. When he worked in concert with the Crown of Sorcery, Azhag was invincible. Only the stubborn desire of the war boss to raid and loot kept this power in check, as his orcish nature contested the will of Nagash on almost everything. In the end, it was one of these arguments between the orc and the great necromancer that provided the opening for the killing blow on Azhag the Slaughterer. Now that we've got equipment checked off, let's go ahead and move on to skills. Of the various skills for Azhag, the most notable difference between him and most orcs is his use of death magic. The Lore of Death, also known as the Wind of Shyish, is one of the most powerful of the 8. The spells contained within it focus mostly on causing lots of damage and debilitating the enemy. Azhag is the only documented greenskin in existence that can use spells outside of the lores of the Big and Little Waaagh that most use. On an orc, this lore is exceptionally dangerous, and allows him to crush enemy champions from a distance while distorting the minds and bodies of his foes, so that the Waaagh can smash them aside without pausing. Very few wizards are capable of combating the power of Nagash, even if it's just a small portion of him. Woe be to any that face the Slaughterer, for the will that powers his magic belongs to a god. Next, although not as powerful as the like of most dragons, Skullmuncha is a surprisingly important part of how Azhag prefers to fight. His wyvern gives the war boss an excellent view of the battlefield, allowing him to develop his complex strategies and outmaneuver his foes. Secondly, he tends to only commit himself to close combat in order to break the enemy's momentum or various parts of the battlefield, which wouldn't be possible without Skullmuncha. That wyvern may not be a greater demon, but it is plenty powerful to tear apart multiple enemy units. When it comes to fighting in close combat, Azhag is a tad bit of a double-edged sword. The initial part of the combat, the war boss is bolstered by the magic within the slashes and his own orcish strength, which gives him a solid start when cutting down foes. Unfortunately, after that initial burst, Azhag isn't really anything special compared to most of his kind. This is why he tends to be better when held back, until a crushing charge is needed to rob the enemy of an advance or shatter a vulnerable flank. However, not everything about Azhag is perfect. The greatest flaw of the war boss is unfortunately he tends to be rather stupid. Due to the endless voices in his mind constantly telling him what to do, most of which he doesn't understand anyway because he's an orc, Azhag is always mentally a little distracted. This occasional spacing out is the only well-known weakness of the Slaughterer, and had he been sharp at all times, it is most likely the lands of men would have perished beneath him. But when it comes to tactics and strategy, Azhag is without a doubt the most brilliant greenskin to ever live, the only one coming even close to that being Gorbad Ironclaw. Obviously, this has more to do with Nagash being in his mind than anything else, as the great necromancer commanded many immense legions in his own time. It was due to his unexpected genius that Azhag earned the title of the Slaughterer, as the world was totally unprepared for a greenskin horde capable of complex tactics. And with that, we are on to the famous battle section. I'm going to be telling Azhag's most famous battle, but I will note I am adding some flourish to it and actually developed it into a full battle that I can tell, rather than just the 3 lines with various complement parts scattered around the Orc and Goblin book. So I hope you guys enjoy. This is canonically accurate. I just threw in a little life to make it a tad bit more interesting to listen to. The greatest battle involving Azhag the Slaughterer was the battle at Butcher's Hill, where Azhag earned his ominous title. Here, a great army of men from Kislev and the northern provinces of the Empire rallied to bring the greenskin Wa to heel and end the invasion of their lands. As the horde approached, the many war machines of the Empire took aim and prepared for the charge, even as the state troops and Kislevite infantry dug themselves in for the defense. Their generals were prepared. They had deployed upon the high ground and were extremely well positioned to repel even the monstrous horde of Azhag. Seeing his foes gathered upon the incline of Butcher's Hill, the mighty war boss heard the plan whispered into his mind by a voice drier than the southern deserts. He quickly put what pieces he understood together, and with a gruff roar he guided Skullmuncha down to hover above his army. Although it was certainly an un-orcish oddity, the Greenskins actually took great pleasure from when their war boss glided over their line to review his troops before the battle. Seeing his mighty wyvern soaring over them and being noticed by the boss inspired them all into a right fighting mood, leading to the boys itching to get to the killin'. Though the troops also had to admit that during these slow glides, Azhag did have a disturbing habit of pausing to shout orders at mobs, which were far too confusing and complex for them to completely understand. Most bosses just yelled and smacked a few boys to get the Wa to charge, but Azhag was actually attempting to order his troops, which was typically a wasted effort. However, this time, the war boss paused over his tides of goblins and snotlings, shouting down at them with weird multi-syllable words, until eventually some of the more clever greenskins began nodding in eager understanding. With that, Skullmuncha took off into the sky once more, and Azhag roared for his horde to charge. As the greenskins began running towards the hill, the war machines and marksmen opened fire in a vain attempt to even up the vast disproportion of numbers between the two armies. Halberdiers lowered their weapons in trained preparation, as Kislevite winged lancers and Imperial pistoliers rode out in hopes of delaying or distracting the enemy. Yet rather than be annoyed by these few horsemen, the Greenskins simply continued charging forwards, archers turning their attention to the enemy cavalry almost as if they expected it, and ending their harassment within a few volleys. As the Greenskins approached the base of the hill, Azhag soared down above his army and unleashed a mighty low roar. In response, his forces began to shift, as the hordes of goblins and snotlings split down the center, running to the left and right flanks of the enemy. The Imperial general looked on in horror, as his army was surrounded in a matter of moments, shouting at his troops to reform and reinforce their flanks against the oncoming tide. As the smaller greenskins crashed home on both sides of the army in a classic pincer movement, the orcs continued slowing and left the front line exposed, confusing the Imperial troops of the combined human nations. The general of their force grasped for possible defensive tactics before deciding to fall back further up the hill, yet realized even before he gave the order that this was now impossible. Although goblins and snotlings are weak and pathetic enemies, their sheer numbers were beyond counting. Although the Empire and Kislevite forces weren't losing much ground, they were completely stuck. It was at this moment that Azhag struck. Calling deep upon the power within the crown, he lashed out with his first spell by focusing his will upon the mind of the enemy general. As the death magic enveloped the man, perhaps he sensed something amiss as he looked up at the war boss soaring above, before Azhag snuffed out his life like a weak candle. As the suddenly drained corpse of the general collapsed in the supposed safety of his personal guard, the war boss used the man's soul to draw the winds of death to him and raised his hands into the air. With the gathering nimbus of black clouds and purple lightning, a ball of light began to form in Azhag's grasping claws. It grew in size and brilliance as each second passed, the magical storm building from a strong gust to a screaming tempest. Dread gripped the Imperial army as the orb in Warboss's hands grew and grew until it was like a purple sun onto the world. With a triumphant shout, Azhag hurled the spell into the center of the human army. Death had come for men. The spell impacted against the hill even as the men beneath screamed in terror. Any touched by it were instantly turned to ash, scattered in gray clouds by the raging winds. As the center collapsed, Azhag released his full wrath. Spell after spell assaulted the minds and bodies of the men on Butcher's Hill, obliterating entire units and causing mass panic. With the backbone of the enemy broken, Azhag gave the signal and watched with satisfaction as his orcs and monstrous forces went crashing into the shattered front line of the survivors. By day's end, nothing but ruin remained on the hill, and this slaughter would be seared into the minds of all men. Azhag the Slaughterer had come. And with that wrapped up, we are done with the famous battle section, and are on to talking about Azhag in Total War Warhammer and just my general thoughts. I want to start off by saying I'm super excited that Azhag's in the game. Some of you might have been aware that at first I wasn't necessarily a big fan, because I wanted a Goblin Legendary Lord, and I was really hoping for Skarsnik. That being said, after playing a couple Warhammer games and doing the lore research for this video, I have come around a lot on Azhag, and I am so excited to play him. Enough that I think he's going to be one of my earlier picks. I think he'll be in my top 3 for which campaign I'm going to do first. So, first of all, talking about him in Total War Warhammer, we got to see quite a bit of his kit in the developer walkthrough, especially the... It's on the Total War channel. I'll put it in the description below if you haven't seen it, though I imagine if you're watching this, you probably have. They showed off a lot of his skills. I'm excited to see that he has the entirety of the Lore of Death. He doesn't just have, like, a couple spells. He has all 7 spells from the lore, and he has the lore attribute, and then it looks like they threw in a couple other little things. So far, it doesn't look like CA has invented any spells, but I'm honestly just super happy to have spells I'll get to recognize, and I can't wait to see them animated. I mean, Curse of the Bad Moon from the Battle of the Thundering Falls video looked amazing. I cannot wait to see Purple Sun of Xerius. That's going to be amazing. I hope that it turns people to ash when it hits them, or else I might be slightly disappointed, but I think I'll enjoy it. So, one thing that we learned about Azhag is he has a bonus to treating with the undead. If you choose Azhag as your legendary lord, you get a campaign bonus to diplomacy with the undead, which is a very interesting direction to go with him. As from a lore perspective, Azhag never met the undead, ever. He came down from the north, smashed into the Empire, and died in 3 years, which is a pretty long time invasion, but considering how far north he was and how far south he got, it's not that surprising his invasion lasted that long. And it's relatively short compared to almost every other orc boss there's been. Azhag's one of the few that actually has his death documented. Most like Grimgor Ironhide, or not Grimgor, sorry, Gorbad Ironclaw, too many irons, and Grom the Paunch of the Misty Mountain, their deaths are not documented, and it's possible they're still alive. Doubtful, but possible. But focusing on Azhag here, I'm really glad that they're exploring the options of what if Azhag had come from the south instead of the north. Because if you haven't seen the campaign starting positions yet, which we'll talk about that in a different video this week, both orcs start in the Badlands, or very close to the Badlands, in the far southeastern part of the map. Which is interesting because neither Azhag or Grimgor are from there. They're both from the northeast, or the very north, just below Norska. Azhag is from Troll Country, as I'm sure you noted earlier. But personally, I'm really excited about this new direction with Azhag. I always wondered what would happen if Azhag, with Nagash in his head, ran into the Undead. Because at the end of the day, especially the vampire counts, they are very beholden to Nagash's power. Many of them resent Nagash for it and hate him, which is why they have actively in their past tried to prevent his resurrection. Typically in the lore, you'll see that necromancers tend to attempt to revive Nagash, or powerful undead individuals. Vampires tend to want those people to stay dead because they see them as competition. So the fact that we get to finally see what would happen if an orc who was technically Nagash, or little Nagash in any event, ran into Manfred von Karstein and whoever this mysterious second legendary lord for the vampire counts is, that it actually has a significant effect, that Nagash is going to be influencing how the vampires feel toward this orc. Because he has even that small fragment of Nagash, though it's probably the most powerful artifact of his, would have a noticeable effect on the undead. So I'm wondering if Nagash is going to play an important role in Azhag's campaign, or if it's just, hey, Nagash is in the crown technically, so here's your bonus. I hope they actually explore the lore of what would happen if Azhag had been more successful and been able to wander more, and how he would have handled dealing with Nagash in his head. That being said, I really doubt they're doing Azhag completely faithfully. I don't think Azhag will suffer from stupidity, because that would be ridiculous in a live-action game. I don't think you're going to have that whole problem of him like arguing with Nagash, which led to his death, because they got into a domestic disturbance and somebody died. So I'm really excited for Azhag. He's looking really powerful. He's definitely your mage general for the orcs, although he has very powerful combat capabilities. If you want to take the magic route, Azhag's a solid choice. Very amused to see that the orcs are bringing the Lord of Death to the table instead of the Empire or the Undead, as far as we know, or even Chaos. If you take Archaon, you get the Lore of Fire, which, and right now, the Chaos can use Death, if I recall correctly, but Chaos also is the only army right now that seems to actually have selection with their Wizard Lords, but we'll talk about that again in a later video. So, Azhag, very excited. Skullmuncher looks like it's going to be a ton of fun to use. Can't wait to have that big old nasty wyvern just swooping down on people. I'm honestly thinking that he's going to function a lot like he did in Tabletop, in that Azhag is going to be a character that you're going to want to keep at a distance and pepper people with death magic, and then when an opportunity presents itself, send him crashing in and just tear up face. That being said, I imagine there will be many different diverse ways to play him. That's just my personal thought, that he will probably excel as a model to take advantage of a weakness you see in the line, or to go up against that really annoying problem causer. I hope Spirit Leech is a really good spell. I can't wait to try and snipe enemy generals with it. In Tabletop, it's a spell where you cast it on a enemy character, and they both take a check, and the difference between the check results in damage. And there's like, it gets past their armor and all this stuff because it attacks their mind. Azhag likely used that spell to kill quite a few people, especially orcs, because they're not very good at defending themselves from that. So, very excited for Azhag. Very excited for a lot of the releases I've seen. I know it's been a while since I've talked to you guys. That being said, very excited for Azhag. I really like his campaign mechanic. I'm glad they're exploring a what-if story with Azhag. And because if you just did Azhag's story, it would be, you start in Troll Country, you kick ass for a little while, and you get killed. I mean, that's super lame. I'm glad that the story is, what if Azhag ended up down here, got to meet a lot more orcs, got to meet the undead, got to fight the dwarves, got to fight Bretonia, got to fight all these different races. So this does open up a lot of fascinating possibilities, because these are some pretty serious lore changes, which means that not everything in 8th edition is set in stone anymore. So there may be opportunities for some things that may have been impossible before to be possible now, because Total War Warhammer is no longer canonically 8th edition. They're extremely close, like hilariously close. But when it comes to starting positions, that shakes a lot of that's a can of worms that CA decided to pop open, and I'm actually very grateful for it, because it shouldn't just be 8th edition. It should be your own story where you get to explore new lore and get to determine what happens, like a sandbox game, which it is. So I hope those of you who watch this video are somewhat excited, or at least maybe super excited, to play Azhag the Slaughterer. I hope you learned what you wanted to about him. Be sure to hit me up in the comment section below if you have any questions. I will be releasing a video side by side with this, so I'm not going to talk about anything that's in that, because that's what that video is for. So thanks again for watching. Really appreciate it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. We've got another 6 days coming up. Take care.